The order sent me 40 bondsfolk that winter as tribute for the peace, and I meant to look at none of them. Peace. I had signed the word with my own hand 3 months before, in a cold tent on the frozen line where Hallenmark's fields ended and the ashlands began, and I had not believed it even as the ink dried. You do not make peace with the ash order. You buy a season from them, and you spend that season waiting for the knife you have already paid for. I had buried 2 brothers and a father to that knife. My eldest brother went down in a border skirmish that the ash swore afterward they had no part in, and we found the assassin's mark on the arrow all the same. My second brother died in his own bed, of a sickness no one could name, and the healer who tended him was gone by morning and never found. My father died in a chair by a fire, an old man at last, and even then, I stood over his body and I searched his cold hands for a wound, because that is what the ash order does to a man. It teaches him that no death in his family is ever only a death. I knew that knife's patience better than I knew my own heartbeat. So when the tribute cart came grinding up the causeway at dusk, its wheels rhymed white and its folk huddled gray against the cold, I stood on the gate tower with the wind cutting through my cloak, and I counted them the way I would count a hand of thrown spears in the half-second before they land. 40. Field hands and weavers and a boy with a split lip who could not have been more than 16. Men the ash had no true use for. Women with the road worn so deep into their faces you could not have said whether they were 30 or 50. Payment in bodies for a war that both sides were pretending, for one winter, not to fight. I meant to send them down to my steward, have them counted and housed and set to work, and go back to my maps and my sleepless hours, and the slow grinding arithmetic of a border that had eaten my whole family and would, in the end, eat me. Then she stepped down off the cart's tail, and my wolf came awake behind my ribs like a hound that has caught a scent through 6 walls of stone. Not still. I want that understood at the very start, because I have heard the old wives of my hold say a wolf goes still when it finds its mate, goes quiet and certain and sure, the way still water knows the moon. Mine did the opposite. It came awake and alert and up onto its feet inside me all at once, hackles half risen, a low sound starting in the back of my throat that I had to swallow before Bran heard it. And I could not for the life of me tell whether it wanted to bare its teeth at her or lie down at her feet. Both. It wanted both, at the very same instant, with the very same violence, and the wanting of both at once was a kind of vertigo I had never felt in 40 years of living and fighting and burying men I loved. I gripped the cold stone of the parapet until my knuckles ached, and I looked down at her, and she was nothing. That was the first thing about her, and it was the most important thing, and it took me 11 days to understand that it was a lie. She was made to be nothing. A gray shawl, a gray shift, boots too good for a field hand that no one but an old soldier would ever have noticed. Hair scraped back and hidden under the shawl. A face turned down and slack, wearing the practiced slackness of a woman who has learned, somewhere hard, that the safest thing to be in the eyes of powerful men is furniture. She did not look up at the tower. She did not look at the guards or the gate, or the height of my walls the way even a frightened weaver counts the height of the wall she means to sleep behind. She looked at nothing, and she stood in the churned gray snow with her weight balanced on the balls of both feet, loose in the knees, hands open at her sides, like a thing that could move in any direction at once, and had trained so long to be ready to that it no longer knew how to stand any other way. I have stood in 100 training yards. I have made boys into soldiers and watched half of them die anyway. I know exactly what that stance costs to learn, and I know it does not come off a body when the body thinks no one is watching, because I was watching from a tower in the dark with the wind in my face, and it did not come off her, not for one breath. "Who's that one?" I said to Bran, my gate captain, a grizzled bear of a man who had served my father and had no illusions left about anything. "Gray shawl, end of the cart, the one looking at nothing." Bran squinted down the manifest the Ash's rider had left, running a blunt finger along the cramped script. "No name on her, Lord. Half of them come without the Ash don't waste ink on chattel. She's marked as a scullion. Kitchen work. He shrugged his heavy shoulders. Mute, the writer said. Tongue's gone or near enough she'll not speak. Won't be any trouble that kind. The quiet ones never are. Mute, nameless furniture. Won't be any trouble. Everything in me that had kept me alive through 19 years of border war stood up straight and cold and said, in the voice I had learned to obey before all others, that one. Whatever else you do tonight, watch that one. And everything else in me, the part my wolf had just woken and would not now let sleep again, not that night, not for the rest of my life, said something I had no name for and would not have said aloud in the mouth of God. It said the other word, the word that has no reason in it, the word a man's blood says when the one soul in the whole freezing world that was made to stand at his back finally walks up his causeway in the snow, disguised as nothing. Put her in the keep, I said. Not the outbuildings, the keep kitchens. Bran turned and looked at me, and the torchlight caught the surprise on his old scarred face. It was not where you put a nameless scullion. The keep kitchens were 3 doors and 1 stair from my own hall. It was, if you thought about it the way an enemy would think about it, and I always thought about everything the way an enemy would think about it. The very last place a sane border king would put a silent stranger the Ash Order had sent him for free. Lord, he said carefully. You heard me, the keep kitchens. And Bran, I made my voice ordinary, made it the voice of a king making a small logistical choice and not a man whose whole chest had just come apart. Have someone keep half an eye on her. That's all, half an eye. I told myself I wanted her where I could see her, where I could set a watch on her, where if she was what the cold part of me knew she was, she would be inside the trap instead of outside it. And that was true. I have told myself a great many true things across my life to keep from having to say the whole of a thing. But it was not the whole of it, and I was too old even then to lie to myself all the way through a winter's night. I did not sleep. I never did. I walked my walls in the dark the way I had walked them for 19 years, and the whole time, under the wind and the packing of the guard and the far-off call of the North Watch, one word kept its low, steady drumbeat under everything else. Mine. God help me, mine. She worked and she was good and she was silent, and for 11 days I learned nothing but that I could not stop looking, and that the looking was slowly taking me apart. I began to invent reasons to pass through the kitchen. An alpha king has no earthly business in his own scullery, and I knew it, and my household began to know it, and I did not care, which frightened me more than the Ash Order ever had. I would come down through the low stone passage that ran behind the great hall, a word for the cook, a question about the winter stores, some errand I built out of nothing. And there she would be at the long scarred worktable, sleeves shoved back over forearms that were leaner and harder than any scullion's had a right to be, her hands moving. And my wolf would rise every single time, that same doubled surge, teeth and knees, danger and hearth, until I was half sick with the war of it, and had to brace a hand against the cold stone of the doorway and breathe. I watched her the way you watch a spy you have not yet proven, which is exactly what I believed her to be. And everything I saw only drove both halves of the wanting deeper into the bone. She was too aware. That was the thing under all the other things. A copper pot slid off a shelf and crashed across the flagstones on my 3rd day down there, and she did not startle, not truly. Her eyes went to it and away and swept every exit in that low room in the space of a single blink, marking the 2 doors and the window and the cook and me and the knife block within reach, all of it, in less time than it takes a normal soul to flinch. And then a full half-beat too late she made herself startle, badly. She jumped and pressed a hand to her chest, and let her shoulders come up around her ears, performing the fear a scullion would feel after she had already finished being unafraid. She was acting weakness the way I acted patience across the peace table. I knew the craft in my bones. What I did not know, what kept me awake, was why in the wide world a kitchen girl would ever have needed to learn it. She ate with her back to the wall, always, Every meal in that whole warm, crowded, steaming kitchen full of chattering tribute folk finding their feet in a strange keep, she would carry her bowl to the one single place in the room where nothing living could come at her from behind the corner by the cold hearth, the wall solid at her shoulder blades, and she would sit, and only then, only with stone at her back, would her shoulders come down a bare finger's width, and something would go out of her face. Not softness. I would not have called it softness, not then. It was a kind of terrible tiredness, the bone-deep tiredness of a body that cannot remember the last time it was allowed to set down its own guard, a body that has held itself ready to kill or die for so many years that readiness has become the only rest it knows, and even that rest is exhausting. I knew that tiredness. God, I knew it. I saw it in my own glass every gray morning, in the eyes of a king who had not truly slept since he was a boy, who could not walk into an empty room without mapping it, who had forgotten, if he had ever known, what it was to be simply, stupidly safe. We were, the two of us, the only two people in that whole loud, warm keep who did not know how to put a guard down. I felt it before I understood it. My wolf had felt it from the tower. It had not been baring its teeth and offering its throat at random. It had recognized, under the gray shawl and the false slackness and the buried lethal grace, the one other soul in the world as tired as I was. On the 11th day, the boy with the split lip, Tam, his name was, a tribute child made a stable hand now, who had taken to following the guards about with his mouth open, went into the training paddock to fetch a bridle and got in the way of a green colt that a groom was fighting to break. The colt reared and came down, and Tam went under its hooves in the frozen mud, and before any of my men in that yard had crossed 10 feet of it, she was there. I still do not fully know how she was there. I have gone over it 100 nights since, and it will not resolve. She had been at the well on the far side of the yard, a wooden bucket in each hand, a good 40 feet from the paddock. And she set both buckets down. This is the part I cannot get past. She set both full buckets down on the frozen ground without spilling a single drop, in the same motion that she began to move, the impossible thoughtless economy of it. No water wasted even in an emergency, because water saved might be water needed later, and the training that had made her did not permit waste even in the reflex of a rescue. And she crossed those 40 feet of churned mud faster than any yard guard I own, faster than I could have. And she took the screaming, striking colt by the head, one hand on the headstall, one hand cupped over its ear, and she put her mouth down close to the great rolling eye and breathed some low sound into it that I could not hear. And the animal that had been 1,000 pounds of terror and iron-shod hooves went still, not cowed, not beaten. It stood down between one heartbeat and the next like a struck sail going slack in a dropped wind, and it stood there trembling and quiet with its nose against her shoulder, and I have only ever seen the very oldest and best of my beast handlers do a thing remotely like it, and never so fast, and never so completely. Then she was on her knees in the frozen muck over the boy, and her hands were on him, his ribs, quick and certain, the back of his skull, 2 fingers to the pulse under his jaw, reading his body the way a war surgeon reads a broken man in the mud of a field where every second is a life. And she looked up, and her mouth opened, and for 1/2 of one instant I would have staked Hallenmark and my crown and my grandfather's bones that she was about to give a clear, hard battlefield order. Get a plank. Keep his neck still. You and you lift on my count, in a voice trained to carry over the noise of dying men. She caught it. God, she caught it. I was near enough by then, come down off the wall at a run, to see her catch her own voice in her teeth and swallow it whole. I saw the order form, and I saw her strangle it, saw the discipline slam down over the reflex like a portcullis dropping, and her face, her whole self, went slack and frightened and mute again in the space of a breath. She pointed at the boy. She pointed at the keep. And she made a small, helpless, useless gesture with both hands, the gesture of a poor voiceless woman who has done what little she can, and does not know what more to do, and is begging the big frightening men to please, please help. But I had seen it. I had seen the thing under the thing, and I think she knew I had, because for just a moment her eyes came up and found mine across the yard, and there was something in them that was not fear at all, a question, cold and clear and old, before she put the slackness back over it like a hand over a candle. I called for my surgeon. We got Tam onto a plank and into the keep, and it turned out she had read him true, cracked ribs, a knock to the skull, but nothing broken that would not mend, and the boy lived to follow the guards about with his mouth open for another day. That night I did not go down to the kitchen. I sat alone in my cold hall with the fire burning low and untended, and I said aloud to the empty air, to the smoke, to my dead father's chair, "Who did they send me?" Because there is only one kind of person in all the world who kills the reflex to give a battlefield order, only one kind of training in all the world that puts a war surgeon's certainty and a commander's voice into the body of a scullion, and then teaches that body to strangle its own voice in its own throat rather than let one true word escape and give the game away. I had fought that kind of person on the ash line. I had lost good men to that kind of person, in the dark, without a sound. I knew, the way you know a footstep on your own stair in the night, exactly what walks like that and stands like that and saves the water even while it runs to save a life. The Ash Order had not sent me a scullion. They had sent me a blade, the finest they had, forged and folded and honed past anything my own yard could make, dressed as a mute and nameless nothing, and they had set it 3 doors and 1 stair from my hall, and they had done it under the seal of a peace I had signed with my own hand, and they had gambled the whole thing on my never looking twice at a woman looking at nothing. They had reckoned on everything but the one thing no spymaster in the world could have put in their ledger. They had not reckoned on my wolf knowing her from the top of a tower in the dark. Any sane border king puts a blade like that in chains before dawn. I want you to understand that I knew this, knew it the way I knew my own name, knew it with every year of survival stacked behind me. There was a woman under my roof, inside my guard, past every wall and watch I owned, who had been trained by my oldest and most patient enemy to do the single thing that enemy wanted most in all the world, to end me quietly, and to leave Hallenmark leaderless and open in the confusion, to fall to the ash spears when the passes thawed, and the peace I'd paid for turned out, as I had always known it would, to be a purchased pause before the killing. Every instinct I had, every dead brother, every cold lesson my father beat into me before the ash killed him too, said the same 3 cold words: cage her, question her, cut the plot out of her before it can bloom. And I could not do it. I lay awake that 11th night with the knowing of it like a live coal pressed against my breastbone, and I turned it over and over, and I could not do it, and I made myself look at why. Because a king who will not look at his own weakness has already lost. I told myself it was strategy. Let the knife believe itself still hidden, and you learn who holds the other end of it, for no blade like her comes alone. The ash never trust a single edge, and behind her there would be a watcher, and behind the watcher a plan. And if I chained her tonight, I would only be cutting off the visible finger of a hand I could not see, and the hand would simply grow another and try again in the spring. That was true. It was even good sense. It was the reasoning I gave Bran the next morning, and he grunted and accepted it, because it was the sort of cold, patient trap my father might have set. But it was not why. And I was too old and too tired to lie to myself all the way to morning. Here is why. My wolf had chosen. Somewhere across those 11 days of watching, the doubled surge had stopped being doubled. The danger had not gone anywhere. I never once, not for a heartbeat, forgot what she was or what she had been sent to do. But underneath the danger, and older than it and surer than my own heartbeat, was the other thing, the mate thing. The bone marrow certainty that the one soul in all the freezing world that had been made to stand at my back, the one person my wolf would lie down and offer its throat to. The answer to a loneliness so old I had stopped feeling it as loneliness, and only felt it as the ordinary weight of being alive. That soul had been sent up my causeway in the snow, with a mission to put a knife in that same back. A man can rule against his enemies. I had done it for 19 years. A man can rule against his own fear, his own grief, his own exhaustion. But a man cannot rule against his own blood telling him mine, that one is mine, in a voice with no mercy and no reason and no politics in it at all. I had spent my whole life doing the sensible, cold thing, and I looked into the fire that night and I understood with a kind of terror that I was not going to do it. Not this time. Not to her. So I did the thing no sane king does. I sent for her, and I made her my own. Not that way, hear me, and hear me clearly, because I have signed my name to enough shame across a lifetime of war, and I would not sign it to that. Not ever, not to her least of all. I called her up to the hall in the thin gray light of the next morning, and I had Brand stand by the door with his hand near his hilt, and I stood her before my father's cold chair, and I looked at the woman who had been sent to kill me, and I said, "You moved on that colt like a soldier. You read that boy on the ground like a surgeon who has read 100 broken men. I have no use in this hold for a scullion who can do those things, and I have a great deal of use for a guard who can." I kept my voice flat and ordinary. "You'll train with my house guard in the yard with the rest. You'll answer to Bran. You'll be fed and armed and paid the same as any of them. That's all." Her face did the mute, frightened, uncomprehending thing, the not understanding of a poor voiceless woman being spoken to too fast by a king. It was a very good thing. It was very nearly perfect. There was not a man in 1,000 who would have seen the machine working behind it. "You can stop that," I said quietly, so that Bran at the door would not hear the whole of it. "The face. I've worn one my whole life. I know exactly what it weighs." And for one instant, one single unguarded instant, the mask cracked straight down the middle, and what looked out at me from behind it was not fear and not cunning and not the cold assessing question I'd seen in the yard. It was something rower than any of those. It was astonishment. The naked astonishment of a creature that has been unseen for so long, has been furniture and a number and a nothing for so long, that it has forgotten it has edges at all suddenly, without warning, finding itself looked at, all the way through, by eyes that were not fooled and were not somehow afraid. Then she put the mask back, but we both knew it was a mask now, and that changes what a mask is. A mask, you both know, is a mask is not a hiding place anymore. It is a courtesy. It is a thing worn between two people who have agreed, without a word, not to say the true thing yet. "You can't speak," I said, giving it back to her, letting her keep the shape of it. "Fine. You'll not need to speak to hold a line or take a blow. Nod if you understand me." She nodded once precisely. "There's a road out that gate," I said, and I watched her very carefully as I said it, because this was the true test, the only one I cared about. "It's open. It's always open. No soul under my roof is a prisoner, whatever the ash wrote on their manifest, whatever they call you. You want the road, you take it today, this hour if you like, and I'll give you a horse and a week's provision and a cloak against the cold, and no man of mine will lift a hand to stop you or follow you. That's a true thing. I don't offer it twice, but I offer it true. I let that sit. Or you take the yard, but if you take the yard, you take it clean. Whatever you were before this gate, you leave it outside the gate. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" I meant it as a test. Will she run, or will she stay to finish the work? I confess that freely. I was still under the wolf, a king setting a trap. But I know now that she did not hear it as a test at all. She heard a door she had not known existed anywhere in the world, being held open by a hand that, she could see it in my face, she read faces for a living, was not going to slam it shut on her fingers the moment she reached through. And I have learned since that this frightened her worse than any threat I could ever have made, worse than the chains I did not use, worse than a blade at her throat. Because the Ash Order does not offer doors. The Ash Order offers a designation, and a mission, and a knife between your own shoulders the instant you fail or falter or feel. She had been, since she was a small child, a thing that is used and then discarded. And I had just stood her in front of a cold chair and told her in so many words that she was a person who could choose. And I do not think in her whole burned life that anyone had ever once told her that, or meant it. She did not take the road. God help us both, she took the yard. She nodded again, once precise, and turned and walked out to begin. And I stood there in my empty hall with my heart going like a war drum, having just armed and quartered inside my own walls the finest killer my enemy ever made, and feeling, for the first time in more years than I could count, something that I only much later understood had been hope. She was, of course, better than every man I owned, and she spent a fortnight making very sure that not one of them would ever suspect it. She lost on purpose, with an artistry that broke my heart to watch. She would take a blow she could have slipped in her sleep. She would let a solid, slow guardsman put her in the frozen dirt, and she would get up dusty and rueful and try again, and lose again, a little less each time, so that her improvement looked like the honest, ordinary improvement of a willing woman with some rough natural gift and a lot to learn. She built herself, blow by deliberate blow, a place in that yard as a promising, likable, entirely ordinary recruit. My men came to like her. The split-lip boy, Tam, mendied now and adoring, trailed her about the yard like a duckling after the only warm thing in a cold pond. And I stood at the high window of my hall in the gray afternoons and watched her make herself small enough to be loved. And I hated the ash order with a purity I had not felt since I searched my dead father's cold hands for a wound. Because I could see the whole shape of it now, the patient, methodical cruelty of the thing they had built out of a living child. They had taken a girl, young enough that it must have been a small girl, and they had cut her name out of her, and her voice out of her, and every softness and every want and every ordinary human weakness out of her, one at a time over years, and they had forged what was left into a blade so fine and so complete that it could walk into the very heart of its enemy's house and be loved there, and be nothing there, and be waiting there, all three at once, for as long as the mission required. She was a masterwork. She was, I understood, watching her lose on purpose to a bull-necked man she could have killed in a breath, the single finest thing the Ash Order had ever made in all its long, patient history of making killers. And she was mine, and she was starving. I watched her come alive by inches across that fortnight and the weeks after it, the way a burned black field comes back green after the first spring rain slowly, and against its own expectation, and unable to stop. The terrible tiredness went out of her a little more each day. Bran came to me, uneasy, scratching his beard, to report that the new woman had stopped sitting up all night against the barracks wall and had begun at last to sleep, to actually sleep, hours of it, the deep sleep of a body that has decided, against all its training, that it is safe enough to close both eyes. She began once to almost smile at Tam, at some clumsy joke the boy made, the corner of her mouth moving before she caught it and killed it. She began to eat facing the room instead of the wall. Small things, the smallest things in the world, and each one of them undid me, because I knew exactly what each one had cost to lose and what it meant to be daring, secretly, to find them again. I was doing the same. I will not pretend I stood outside it, a king observing his prisoners thaw. I was thawing too, in my cold hall and my sleepless walls. I found myself inventing yard inspections. I found myself, in council, thinking of a thing she had done with her hands and losing the thread of what my quartermaster was saying. I found one night that I had slept 3 whole hours, unbroken, the first in I could not say how long, and I woke and lay in the dark and understood that some animal part of me had decided the keep was safe because she was in it, which was madness, which was the exact inversion of every sane fact, and which was none the less true. My wolf slept because the most dangerous thing in my world was under my roof, and it had decided that the most dangerous thing in my world was ours. The night it turned, I found her in the yard past midnight. I had not gone looking for her. I could not sleep. The 3 hours had been a gift, not a habit, and most nights were still the old sleepless nights, and I walked my walls in the dark the way I always did, and somewhere below me in the black I heard steel. A whisper of it. The particular sound a blade makes when it is being moved fast and controlled through cold air by someone who knows exactly what they are doing. I went still with my hand on my own knife, every old instinct awake, and I looked down into the moonlit yard. And it was her, alone. She thought she was alone, and she had stopped pretending. I have trained fighting men my entire life, and I had never seen anything remotely like it. In the empty silver yard, certain that no eye in the world was on her, she moved through a form, a long unfolding sequence of strikes and turns and impossible balances, so fast and so silent, and so utterly complete that it did not look like fighting at all. It looked like water finding the only shape a river can take. It looked like a thing that had never been taught, only remembered from before birth. Every false clumsiness she wore in the daylight was gone, slewed off like a wet cloak, and what was left underneath, moving alone in the moonlight, was the most beautiful and the most purely terrible thing I have ever watched a human body do. And I understood, standing there in the dark above her, precisely what I had invited inside my walls, and precisely how easily it could have already killed me a dozen times over in the dark of my own kitchen passage, and precisely why it had not. She finished the form and stood in the center of the yard with her breath smoking in the cold and her chest heaving, and she looked up, straight at me, on my own wall in the dark, where no ordinary soul could have known a man was standing. Because of course she had known. Of course she had known the whole time. She had heard me on the wall the way she heard everything, and she had chosen tonight to let me watch. After weeks of hiding, after a lifetime of hiding, she had taken off the whole disguise in the moonlight on purpose, where the one man who was not supposed to see it could see all of it. And now she stood in the silver light with her true self hanging out naked in the cold, and she waited without moving to see what I would do with it. So I came down. I crossed the yard, my boots loud on the frozen ground where hers had made no sound at all, and I stopped an arm's length from her, closer than any sane king ever stands to a blade of the ash, and my wolf was roaring under my skin, the old doubled roar, mine and danger and mine and home, and I said the only true thing I had left. They sent you to kill me. She did not flinch. She did not drop back into the mask. She held my eyes in the moonlight, and then, the first sound I ever heard her make, she spoke. Her voice was cracked and rusted and low, hauled up from the bottom of a dry well that had not held water in years, a voice that had been used so seldom it had half forgotten how. But it was clear. Yes. Just that. One word. The mute woman was not mute. Of course she was not mute. She had simply been a fortress with every gate barred and the drawbridge up, and she had just for me, for reasons neither of us yet dared name, cranked one gate up a hand's width and let a single true word walk out alone into the cold. When I said, "The thaw," her voice steadied as she used it, the way a limb steadies when the blood comes back into it after long numbness, painful, prickling, alive. When the high passes open and the ash muster to march, I'm to open the north postern from the inside in the dark the night before, and end you in your bed in the confusion, quiet, so it reads as a bad heart in your sleep, and the peace looks kept right up until the spears come over the wall. Her jaw worked. 15 years ago I would have done it and slept fine. I want you to know that. I am telling you what I am. Do not make me into something gentler than I was made. And now, I said. She looked at me, and the thing I had glimpsed once, behind the cracked mask in my hall, was all the way out now, standing naked in the silver light, and it was not a killer's thing at all. It was a starved thing. A person, buried alive so young and so long that they had forgotten there was a sky, standing suddenly in the open air of a choice, and not knowing whether the open air would fill their lungs or kill them. Now you gave me a door, she said, very low. And I have spent these weeks learning what it costs a man to hold one open, because you have held it open every single day, and you have not once closed it, and you knew what I was the whole time. I saw you know it, that first day in your hall. You knew, and you fed me anyway, and you armed me anyway, and you told me the road was open anyway. Her breath shook, and she let it. No one has ever let me leave a room, Alpha King. Do you understand what I am telling you? Not once in the whole of my life Has anyone let me leave a room of my own choosing? And you handed me a horse and a week's bread and a cloak and told me to go if I wished, and it near broke me where a knife never could, because I could not take the road, and I cannot open the postern, and I do not, the next word cost her more than the whole rest of it, I do not know how to be a person who wants a thing. They took that out of me before they took my name, and you have gone and put it back, and I do not know what to do with it, and I am more afraid now than I have ever been in my life. What is your name? I said. And she made a sound then that was worse than any weeping I have ever heard, a small, dry, cracked sound, the sound of a thing breaking that has been holding for far too long, and she said, I don't have one. They call me the seventh blade. I have been the seventh blade since I was 9 years old, and I do not remember the one that came before it. It's gone. They burned it out of me the way you burn a field, root and stalk, so nothing of the old crop can come up in the new. That is what you have inside your walls, Alpha King. Not a woman with a hidden name waiting to be found. A number. A number they folded and hammered into a knife, and there is nothing under the knife but more knife, all the way down. My wolf did not roar any more. It had gone down onto its haunches inside me, gone quiet and enormous and certain, and in its quiet I understood at last what the doubled surge had been trying to tell me from the top of the tower on the very first night. It had not been telling me to choose between the danger and the hearth. It had been telling me, both. She is both. She is the single most dangerous thing in your entire world, and she is the only home you will ever have. And they are the same person, standing in the same worn boots in the same moonlight, and you do not get to keep the one without the other. You take the blade and the starved child in one hand, or you take neither. You have a name, I said. You've only not been given it back yet. And that, I chose the words with great care because I could feel how much weight she was going to hang on them. That is a thing that can be undone, not the old one. You're right, the old one's ash, and I'll not lie to you and say I can raise it. But a name isn't only the word you're born under. We'll come to that. Not tonight. She stared at me as though I had spoken in a tongue that died 1,000 years before she was born. And then, far off across the frozen dark, a wolf howled, one of mine from the north watch, a long note rising and falling on the wind, and her whole body changed. It snapped from starved back to blade in the space of a single breath, the moonlit softness gone, replaced by something flat and cold and utterly professional, and she said in a completely different voice, They didn't send only me. I have gone over the next part more times than I can count, and it still comes to me in broken pieces. The way the worst nights of a long life always do, out of order, too bright in places, black in others. She knew the order that made her the way I know the stones of my own keep. And she knew, better than any spymaster of mine could have told me, that no plan of the ashes ever rests on a single edge, because a single edge can be turned, can be caught, can be dulled, can go soft and traitorous inside the warmth of an enemy's house. Exactly, that is, as she had. So there was always a second. A watcher set upon the watcher, planted among the same 40 tribute folk, whose whole task was to make certain the seventh blade did her work, and to do that work herself, cleanly, the instant it became clear the seventh blade would not. And the seventh blade had just, standing in the moonlit yard an arm's length from the living Alpha King with her whole true self hanging naked in the cold air and no knife anywhere near his heart, failed. Completely. Visibly. In the open, under the moon, for anyone with the right eyes and the right vantage to read. The stable loft, she breathed, and she was already moving, already flowing across the frozen yard toward the black bulk of the barn, and I was a half-step behind her with my own knife out and my wolf up and roaring again. Sightling down onto the whole yard, if she was set there tonight to watch me, if she saw what just. The loft door stood open. Even I could see that it should not have been open. No groom leaves a loft door swinging in a killing frost. What happened in that barn happened in near total dark, and it happened faster than telling, and I was inside it, and I still cannot give you the true order of it. I know the second blade came down out of that black loft like a falling star, silent, a killing drop, a garrote wire between two handles meant for my throat, the professional's kill that leaves a border king dead in his own straw with no wound the piece could not explain away as a sad accident or a quiet sickness. I know I had exactly enough time to see it coming and no time at all to answer it. 19 years of war, and I would have died there in my own stable with a wire across my windpipe and never made a single sound, and Hallenmark would have gone down with me at the thaw. I know that the seventh blade got there first. She was between me and the falling star before the wire touched me. I felt her shoulder drive hard into my chest, felt myself go down and back into the piled straw, and above me in the black there was a brief, furious, impossible violence. Two of the finest killers the Ash Order ever forged loosed against each other in a space far too small and too dark for it. No words, no war cries, no sound at all but breath and the small wet mechanical sounds of the thing they had both been built from childhood to do. It lasted no time. It lasted forever. And then one body dropped to the boards and did not move again, and one body stood, swaying, and the one that stood was hers. One hand pressed hard and flat to her own left side, where the other's blade had opened her deep before she ended it. She had turned. In the final, absolute test of everything the Ash had made her, with her enemy king's life hanging in the dark and a sister blade of her own order dropping out of the black to take it, she had turned. She had killed for me instead of for them, and she had taken the wound doing it. She was mine. There was no question left anywhere in the world. I was up out of the straw and had her before she could fall, my arm around her, and my hand came away red and did not stop being red, and I was already roaring for lights, for my surgeon, for Bran, the whole keep coming awake around us. And she was saying, low and fierce and urgent through her teeth, gripping my arm hard enough to bruise. It's done now. Do you understand me? It's done. There's no undoing this when the thaw comes and no word of your death reaches the Ash. They will know the seventh blade turned, and they will not merely march on Hallenmark. They will come for this hold with everything, because a blade that turns is the one thing an order like theirs cannot survive letting the world see. I've made you a war, Alpha King. I've made you a worse war than you had. And I don't even, her voice cracked, and she laughed, a terrible small broken sound, blood on her lips. I don't even have a name to sign the thing I've done to you. Then we'll win it, I said, holding her up, holding her together with my two hands as the torches came. And we'll find you one, both, in that order. Now stop talking and let me carry you, and don't you dare argue with your king. And she almost smiled, the ghost of the almost smile she'd once given the boy in the yard. And then her eyes rolled white and she went down into the dark, and I carried her up into the light myself and would let no other hand take her. She lived. I will tell you that plainly and quickly here, out of order, because I have made you sit through enough hard dark nights, and you have earned the mercy of knowing it before I make you wait through one more. She lived. But it was a near thing, a nearer thing than any wound I ever took myself, and my surgeon did not sleep for 2 full days, and neither did I. The other blade had gone deep and true, and there was a fever after, the wound fever that carries off strong men, and there was a black hour before the dawn of the third day when it burned so high that she spoke. She who guarded every word like a coin spoke aloud in her sleep in a child's small clear voice, in a language I did not know and had never heard. Calling for someone. A mother, I have always thought, or the ghost of the memory of one, some warmth from before the order took her and made her a number. I sat in the dark by that low cot with my useless scarred king's hands hanging empty between my knees, and I listened to a 9-year-old girl calling through the mouth of a grown killer for a mother 15 years and a whole burned name in the past, and I would have given the whole of Hallenmark, the walls, the fields, the crown off my own head and the ring off my own hand, to be able to answer her in the voice she was calling for, to be able to give that buried child back, the one thing they cut out of her before all the rest. But I could not give her that. No one living could. It was gone, root and stalk, burned out at 9 years old, and no wanting of mine, however fierce, would raise it out of the ash. So on the morning the fever finally broke, when she opened her eyes to the thin gray light and found me still sitting there, unshaven, red-eyed, an alpha king who had sat 3 days and 3 nights at a nameless bondswoman's cot, and let his war council and his quartermaster and his whole anxious keep wait outside the door, I gave her the other thing. The thing I had turned over and over through all those long dark hours, looking for the shape of it, the one gift I could actually put into her hands. "You told me," I said, my own voice rough with the sleepless nights, "that you don't have a name, that they took it and burned it and you can't get it back. And you're right, that one's gone. I won't insult you by pretending otherwise." I leaned forward. "But a name isn't only the word you were born under. Listen to me now, because this is the truest thing I know. A name is the word you answer to. It's the word the people who love you call out when they need you to turn around. And that word, that one you get to choose. It's the only thing in your whole burned life that was ever, from the very start, going to be yours to pick. Not theirs. Not the order's. Not even mine, though God knows I want to give you the world. Yours. You choose it. And I will build a life around whatever word you say, and I will teach every soul in this hold to call you by it. And when the ash come over the thaw line hunting the seventh blade." I took her hand. It lay in mine, red-scarred and lethal, and at last entirely unhidden, no mask on it and no mask on her. "They will not find her. She died in that barn, saving her king. The woman they meet on my north wall, with a blade in her hand and my guard at her back, will have a name they never gave her and could never take, and she will be standing exactly where she was always meant to stand, at my back, guarding it, and no order on this earth or under it will ever take her out of that place again while I draw breath." She was quiet for so long I feared the fever had cost her more than her body. Outside the narrow window, I could hear the first true thaw wind of the year beginning to move over the walls, warm and wrong and early, 3 weeks too soon, and somewhere below in the yard a wolf, my wolf, hers now too, I had no doubt of it, lifted its voice and sang at the changing of the weather, the long note rising and falling. And then she said a word. A small, plain old word, an ordinary word. The kind a mother in a warm cottage might have called down a lane at dusk. I will not write it here because it is hers. She chose it out of the whole wide world, and she gave it to me and to Hallenmark and to no one else, and it is not mine to set down on a page for strangers. But she said it in her cracked, well-bottomed voice, and her voice did not shake at all when she said it. It was the steadiest I had ever heard her. I said it back to her, out loud, in the gray morning light. The first time in 15 years that anyone in all the world had called her anything at all but a number and a blade. She turned her face to the wall then, and I let her, and I kept her hand in mine and did not let that go, and I did not name the thing that was on her face, because some things a king does not put words to, not in his own hall, not to his own council, not even to himself in the dark. Some things you only guard. The thaw came 3 weeks early and wrong, and the ash came with it, exactly as she had said they would. I could tell you the whole of that war, and it was long and it was hard and it took the better part of 2 years, but I will tell you only the shape of it and the one part that matters, because this is not, in the end, a story about a war. It is a story about the woman who won it. They came, as she had promised, with everything. A blade that turns is the single thing an order built on obedience cannot survive letting the world see, and so they could not let it stand. They had to erase Hallenmark and the seventh blade both, wholly, publicly, as a lesson written in fire to every other edge they had ever forged and set loose in an enemy's house. They mustered a force that dwarfed the season's ordinary rating. They came to end us. And they could not. They could not, for one reason above all the others, and the reason was her. She knew them. She knew the ash order from the inside, the way I know the halls of my own keep in the dark, where every door was, how every plan was built, which feint was real and which was the shadow of a feint, how their commanders thought, and where their patience ended and their pride began. She sat at my war table, the nameless bondswoman, healing, then healed, then hard and clear and terrible in a way my grizzled captains came first to distrust, and then fast to fear, and to trust past any of their own kind, and she took the war apart before it happened. She told me where they would strike and where they only wished me to think they would strike. She told me the name and the manner of the man they would send in the dark to do what she had refused to do, and we were waiting for him at the postern when he came, and he did not come again. She turned their own patience against them, their own certainty, their own long, cold assumption that the seventh blade could only ever be theirs. We pushed the border 20 miles further from my fields than my father ever held it, or his father, and we held it. And the holding of it is why the children of Hallenmark grow up now not knowing what it is to search a dead man's hands for a hidden wound. That is her doing. Every quiet dawn on my frontier is a thing she built with the exact knowledge they made in her to unbuild me. That was the Ash Order's one true error in all its long, patient history. They had forged the finest blade in the world to end me, and they had never once imagined that a blade, handed a single open door and a single hand that would not close on its fingers, might turn in their grip and cut the hand that held it. It was the only mistake they ever made with me. It was more than enough. We are old now, she and I. The border is quiet, truly quiet, the deep quiet you can lean your whole weight on, the quiet that took us 30 years and more to earn and that neither of us, even now, entirely trusts, because you do not unlearn a whole childhood of readiness, not ever, and we have stopped expecting to. My house guard is the finest on any march in the wide world, and half of them do not know, the young ones never know, that the gray-haired woman who taught them to stand with their weight on the balls of both feet, who taught them to save the water even while they run, who can still, at her age, put a cocky boy of 20 in the dirt without seeming to move, was once the most feared thing the Ash Order ever loosed into the dark of a winter's night. She built my guard. It is hers more than it is mine. The boy with the split lip is a grizzled captain now, with sons of his own and a stiff knee from an old fight, and he named his eldest daughter after her, after the name she chose out of the whole wide world, the plain old word, the one that is hers. There are a dozen girls in Hallenmark carrying that name now. It has become, in my hold, a name you give a daughter you hope will be strong. None of them know where it came from. She likes it that way. She says a name means more when it belongs to the living than when it belongs to a story. And I have learned across a long life not to argue with her about the weight of names. I still walk my walls at night. I cannot sleep. I never truly could. Some things the years do not mend, and I have made my peace with that one. But now, when I come down out of the dark, she is there, because she never could sleep either. We neither of us ever learned it properly, and we long ago stopped pretending to each other that we did. We stand together at the north wall in the cold, two old guards who spent their whole lives learning that silence is the safest place a body can stand, and we watch the passes she once meant to open against me, dark and quiet under the moon, and we do not always speak. We have made silence, at the very last, into the safest place to stand together, which is a thing I did not know silence could be until her. They sent me a blade to bury in my back. I have kept her at my side instead, every day of my life since, and every single dawn. This is the whole of it. This is the only crown I have ever truly worn. I turn to her in the gray light, and I speak aloud the name she chose for herself out of all the words in the world. And she turns around. She always turns around. That is the thing they never understood, my old enemies, in all their long, patient cruelty. You can burn a name out of a child. You can forge a blade so fine it forgets it was ever a person. But if you hand that blade to a man fool enough and stubborn enough to hold a door open and never close it, and if that man calls the buried thing by a name it chose for itself, in the light, in love, it will turn around. Every time, for the rest of its life. It will turn around.